we're ready.
Ready? Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January 19, 2017 Board of Selectmen meeting. Can we all stand and pledge allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, opening comments. T?
I'd like to give it to you
Okay.
to start.
As everybody can see, our chairman is not here this evening. He had another loss in his family, his sister Maureen, who was a wonderful girl. And I would ask everybody to keep the Lombard family and Richie in their thoughts.
I also would like to have us keep in our thoughts the Alessi family. Barbara Alessi passed last week. Wonderful lady. Sorry to have that. Thank you.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to approve the prior minutes of 1/5/2017 and release executive session minutes of 7/20/16, 8/3/16, and 8/9/16.
I move the Board of Selectmen vote to approve the prior minutes of 1/5/17 and release the executive session minutes of 7/20/16, 8/3/16, and 8/9/16.
Okay, I'll second that for discussion. Discussion. Okay, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We're going to go into the citizens forum now. Is there anybody here that would like to get up and speak? Okay. Well, is it for the preservation?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is it's way down on the block here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the auction motion of January 24th at noon, property at 25 Forbush, up to the Citizens Forum. And I'll just give a brief description of it. It's a 0.26 acre parcel. It's located at the corner of Walton Road. It is close proximity to the Mass Audubon's Nahant Thicket Wildlife Sanctuary and not far from Dorothy Cove. The site is improved with a 1,082 square foot home in disrepair and will be sold subject to the restriction of demolishing the existing structure within 6 months. Any development of the property will be prohibited, and the use of the property will be limited to unoccupied and open space. And I might add, it's right across the street from a parcel property that was donated to the Preservation Trust some 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was. Okay. It's the Zikos Group. They're the professional auctioneer that's going to be doing it. And I'm going to turn it up if anybody wishes to speak on it. Okay, Ross.
Yeah, Rose Pulio, Nahant Preservation Trust. I'm here to represent our committee and SWIM and I think the Mass Audubon Society, and we'd all like to see that particular piece of land stay and be preserved as natural land, be cleaned up, and become part of the bird sanctuary. The Preservation Trust is willing to and wants to bid on it and keep it. We'll take the house down and maintain it. And that's about it, you know. We do want to see that land preserved. It's a great piece of land down there, and the bird sanctuary is a great place to wander and keep natural in the heart. We don't have that much natural land left.
Right, no, you're right.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Enzo, you may want to mention the date and time of the auction,
Oh, I think I did. It's, but it's January 24th at 12 p.m.
which is this coming Tuesday.
High noon.
Yeah, high noon.
Okay.
And it's on the site
Ben.
itself.
Yep. My name is Ben Zach. I live
Yep.
at 18 Furbush Road. I just wanted to second that this is also what we would like to see happen as neighbors. We also feel that we appreciate all the open space. We like to continue and to see that space remain undeveloped. And one other quick question. If, let's say, I certainly hope you win the auction. If the Preservation Society does not win the auction and it goes into a private hands, what is the chance, or what would be the process by which they would have to go through to change and be allowed to build on it? Or is that something that they couldn't do?
Change that they could,
So what you're asking is, can the property be sold to a party that would have the intent of developing it?
Correct.
Or using it another way? No, the town would not sell it under those terms, and if someone were to bid for it and then be awarded it, there would be a deed restriction on the property that would prohibit that.
Okay.
And so they would have to basically encumber themselves. And the deed would restrict them from doing anything but what the intended purpose.
Okay. And so there's no way they could override that at a later date, like 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road or something like that?
There are legal discussions about something 30 years beyond, but most communities feel confident that it's for perpetuity.
Okay. And then what if they wanted to, let's say, cut down all the trees and cover it with blacktop and make a driveway? Is that something they could do too? Or would
cover it with hot top?
Yeah, hard top, or that includes buildings.
It can't, it's in a flood zone, so they
So
really
that's
can't.
not- okay.
That would be water disbursement, there would be heavy restrictions on it. So it's basically gonna be open space, because there's a ditch that goes through there, am I right, Mark? By that whole property? Right. Right. So, again, our intentions were, when we deeded it as open space, the Board of Selectmen had voted on that last year. And our intentions were to keep it that way because Nahant needs more open space, especially in the flood zone. This is all going to help us when we enter that, and I've been talking about it, the community rating system. And it's going to lower everybody's insurance. I mean, not just people in the flood zone, it's going to lower everybody's insurance. So it's really important that we do this. And my feeling is we're never going to see the money to pay for it, to all the back taxes. So my feeling would be that leave it as open space and let the Preservation Trust deal with it, the Nahant Preservation Trust bid on it. And I'm hoping that that's what will happen.
Okay, and is there any way to streamline would there be any mechanism by which we could just give it to them or sell it to them at a rate or something?
No, there are two processes by which we can dispose of land. So the first process in tax title is an auction. The second process is to take it to town meeting.
Okay.
Town meeting is obviously a delayed timeline, so this is the most expedient way of moving this along.
Okay, great, thank you. That answers my questions.
Okay, anybody else? Mark Clark.
Okay. Now, I understand, in other words, if somebody wanted to come into that property and put up a garage, no way.
No.
Okay, that's
No.
good. That's all I was concerned about.
You can put a lawn chair there.
Okay. And I want to thank you guys for working so hard on this and making that possible. That's really going to help us down there. We've had water problems, sewer problems, and that, so this is going to help a lot, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we read that, and that's that. We're going to be talking about that later. All right, so at this point, we're going to go to the town administrator's report.
Okay, thank you, Enzo. The first item is a presentation regarding the 40 Steps Beach Revetment Project. Just to give you a background on the project, about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, my predecessor's predecessor had submitted a grant to MEMA to actually armor the revetment along 40 Steps Beach. So the revetment runs for basically that, from the steps all the way to the corner of Cliff and Nahant Street. And so that full length there is the project site. And what we have here tonight is Dan Coughlin, who will be giving us a presentation. And before he gives the presentation, you should understand that this is a grant that was received by the town. It's 75% funded by the federal government, and then 25% by the town. It's a 3-year project. It's 2 phases. Phase 1 we're in, which is the design phase, and Dan will walk us through that. And then phase 2 is a 2-year project of installation. And so what he'll show you is what it will look like when it's done. So Dan Coughlin, who is the contracted engineer for the town, if you could walk us through it.
Okay, thank you. This is just a progress print at this point in time. As Jeff had indicated, the grant is 25%. The total value of the grant projected at this point in time the total value of the project is $579,000. So that would bring the town share to right around 144 and change, 144,000 and change. The project initially started off, or the concept of the project started off in 2011. We did our first grant then. It was not accepted, or it wasn't approved at that point in time by MEMA. We then did a later grant around 2013, and that was accepted. And we've gone through a series of additional submissions with MEMA and FEMA as they had more questions on the project itself. At one point in time, we did go out there with DEP and CZM to review the project, and we had a couple of different opinions, and based upon those different opinions, FEMA felt that it would be wise to break the project up into phases. So we're in the first phase right now. That first phase is design and permitting. After that phase is complete and permits are in place, the second phase of the project, which is the construction phase, would then be reviewed and awarded. So right now, we're only doing the design and the permitting aspects of this project. We recently had it surveyed. Last survey, I believe, is back in 1997, so it had a little bit of updating relative to erosion at the site. As you can see on this plan over to the side, and it's also in your packages, 40-step beach, as you're familiar with, has some rocks or ledge outcrops on both of the two sides of it. And in the middle, there's basically a Jersey barrier, which is essentially functioning as a small seawall. Above that Jersey barrier was dumped stone, trap rock, crushed stone that was used as a revetment to dissipate wave action. Over the years, and this is dating back into the 90s as well, there's been a series of storms that have continually eroded away. The town has done some work to kind of repair the slope and supplement the slope, but this is a recurring problem, and it's very difficult to do this work because of limited access to the beach itself. I do have a couple of photos for you. Thank you. What we have is a series of photos of the actual conditions at the site. They're done during the growing season, so you can't really see a lot of the erosion that's occurring above the Jersey barrier. It's over-vegetated. But there's probably a section at least that extends back about 8 feet and has basically undermined the slope so that it is under constant erosion at this point in time. Some of the past practices of the town have been to put in a jute mesh or a netting on the slope with additional vegetation. And for the most part, that has worked fairly well. The issue is, again, these intense storms which would tend to undermine the slope. That slope is pretty steep, as you're well familiar with, and it's pretty much at its limit as far as stability. There are sections along the slope that are about 1.5 to 1. We usually deem that to be the limit as far as good vegetation stabilization. A couple other areas are a little bit more shallow, about 1.7 to 1, 1.8 to 1. But right at the corner where you see the bend in the seawall, right above that area, it is pretty limited as far as additional erosion. So the issue is basically if you had additional erosion occurring on that slope, the slope would adjust itself over the years, and you'd start undermining what's at the top, and what's at the top is the roadway itself, the utilities, and that affects a lot of the residents in that area. So the whole grant was basically to try to establish a permanent or more permanent solution to the erosion problems that you have at 40 Step, and to safeguard those utilities in the roadway as well as the roadway itself. The issues that we have with this project is DP has taken some views that basically they would like to see some of these coastal banks erode to supplement beaches, and they have strict policies regarding what improvements you can make on some of these slopes. So the key here is basically to try to identify that this beach or this area does not supplement or fulfill other beaches in the area. And because of the ledge outcrops on either side, we think we have a pretty good chance of demonstrating that to DEP and CZM, indicating that beach nourishment is really not a prime concern for this location. Also, again, because of the slope, it is an integral part to preserve the roadway and the utilities on the roadway. So, although we've indicated we got some negative feedback from CZM initially, and that's why we're in this two-phase process, we feel confident that eventually, it may take a little time, but we will prevail and hopefully get the project permitted so the next phase of the project can go through, meaning construction. The scope or the limits, I'll just bring that a little closer.
We're going to permit this through the Conservation Commission, right, Dan?
Yes.
Okay.
Grab the mic. Yeah, yeah, just, there you go. Easier said than
Take the
done.
whole thing.
It's wrapped around there pretty well. Okay. So the first step in doing the actual construction that we have here is to actually gain access to the beach. And as you know, the slopes are very steep all the way around. So the only way we've done it, and historically this is the way it's been done, is to cut a roadway in along the slope or across the slope down to the beach area. And this works very effectively. In the top part, you'd actually be digging into the ground, and you bring that material and fill in front of yourself, and then you can get basically both truck access and heavy equipment access to the beach, so you can do the placement of the revetment. So the first step is basically to construct the roadway. You can see the yellow marks I have here. The majority of the roadway construction is actually on private property. So Jeff has already started or initiated conversations with those owners, and at this stage it's very, looks like it would go through fairly well. But what we're planning on doing is executing license agreements with those abutters to have access, temporary access to this roadway. And those license agreements would basically detail the work that we're doing and also detail how it would be repaired afterwards. Those license agreements typically would extend for a period of time. In this case, we have a 3-year grant, so normally what we do is extend it 1 year longer. So it would be either those license agreements will either expire in 4 years or 6 months after work is complete. And we use the 6-month interval just in case there's warranty work involved. We have to get back in there to do something else. We have that envelope of time to do that. So this is basically the first step, is basically getting the roadway in. You can see on some of these sections, basically what we're doing is how we're cutting the roadway. Starting at the top, it would be basically some digging down in that area. And then we'd basically be panning it out, and then finally at the bottom, it would be almost all fill excavated from these other areas. So basically, we're bringing down a fairly even grade. It would be compacted to be erosion control on both sides. The banks, as you can see on some of these, would be steep as well, because we're cutting into it. We'd put a jute mesh and anchor that into place, so we would limit erosion on that. We'd also have some erosion controls down on the beach area itself to prevent any large siltation, although that's a natural process at the beach. The proposed design at this point in time involves, after we get down to the beach, is basically some large revetment, large stones placed above the Jersey barrier, and that would extend up to an approximate height of about 27 feet. Current elevations of the still waters plus the wave run-up with the Woods Hole report indicate that we have an elevation of about 31 here. Before it used to be 48. 48 was basically on top of the roadway at this point. So 31 is basically what we have to work with right now. So the heavy revetment, it will go up to about 27 feet, and then we'll have a lighter revetment above that, because that's all wave run-up beyond that point. And that would be up to elevation 31. Now, above that point, because we will be disturbing the slope, we're also putting in coir envelopes, which are basically either jute or coconut husk mesh envelopes, which are filled with sand and then sewn together, and those are basically buried in place. And those would be above, at the upper levels, and it would also be in any area that we disturb as part of the roadway excavation. So you can see over here, we also have some more over in this area. We're also going to be doing some additional revetment in front of the seawall, or in front of the Jersey barrier, and primarily that's going to be at the two endpoints, where we can get the most scour, as well as a little bit in front of this area, which is already a rock surface. So we have a ledge outcrop surface. There's nothing we can really put onto there to stabilize it except more rocks, and that's what we'll do in that one area to help break the surf. There'll also be a little bit of the light revetment on this side. It's not a primary wave impact area, but there is marginal erosion from some of the past storms, so we'll stabilize that as well. Sure. Large boulders. Essentially, we have a gradation. The largest one would be about, I'd say about 7 ton, which is a pretty large boulder. It's about 4.5 feet in diameter. And some of the other ones would basically be the smaller size, probably something in the range of about 2 feet in diameter. So this is the basic mock-up as far as a section through what would be provided on there. You have your Jersey barrier at the base that's anchored in. There'd be the heavy stone revetment. Again, this extends up about 26 feet or so, and the elevation's about elevation 27. And then additional smaller revetment, and that would extend up to 31. And then the coir envelopes, which are anchored into place, with soil anchors and roped into place. So they're stabilized, and that area is covered over with soil materials that we have on site, and then it is revegetated. Now that revegetation would also eventually extend into the smaller revetment, but this would always remain solid large stone revetment. Underneath would basically be a geotextile, some bedding stone, basically to stabilize it and allow free drainage. Obviously, there would, any other disturbed areas outside of that would be either set with a jute mesh to stabilize them as well.
So, Dan, how does the drainage work in that lower section? I would imagine you have the potential of getting large amounts of water in between those rocks.
Right. So basically, the key is basically not to lose fines from underneath the system. So this basically, this area in here basically is the geotextile, and that would separate the fines from moving or transmitting out of this area. When you have large wave action, this would be a saturated area. The soils up here would also be saturated, but the issue is, so those soils don't move, you have the large revetment to hold it in place.
So the water within the rocks itself, does it weep through the...
It would weep through the Jersey barriers.
Okay, all right, that's what I was looking at, see if there's some drain there. Okay.
Yes. But basically, some would infiltrate, but in this area, I'm sure we have ledge outcrops not too far below the surface in many of the areas, so it would be basically skimming down and draining out. But the key is basically to retain those native soils in place so they don't move.
And you're going to be tying this into around the corner to the, they just did a bunch of work over there too. I think it was Costins and...
Sure.
It's pretty close, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see some pictures, we did that project as well.
How big were the first time they did it, the rock, I think the boulders were too small. Back in 1996.
This is just an example, pretty much, of what was done around the corner. The first is basically the roadway. You see some additional pictures on the placement of the material, placement of the stones, and also you can see some of the coir envelopes being set, and then finally the finished product of the finished picture.
Well, I know it's a real problem out there, because they were going to lose some of their property, and the town's going to lose their utilities in the roadway pretty soon.
Right.
If we don't do something about it. So I think it's a great idea, and I think the way it's placed is perfect. And then, of course, you have Northeastern on the other side. They're doing a bunch of work, too, so it'll all kind of tie in together.
Right.
So Dan, could you walk through the timeline, walking through the first phase and then
Sure.
the 2 phases of phase 2?
Right now, we have, the first phase will extend to August of this year. And during that first phase, even though we can't get extensions, hopefully we'll be done well before that. This first phase is basically development of the design plans, specifications, and putting together basically documentation for submission both to the Concom and DEP. And that submission would have to be an alternatives analysis as well. And the alternatives analysis would look at different types of slope stabilization techniques and the reasons why we picked this type of system in order to justify our notice of intent filing.
Yeah.
So essentially, after that first phase, we'll go to the Concom. At that point in time, DEP or CZM may also make additional comments. We may have to address additional concerns, and that's why we've left a good margin of time, basically, to address those issues, and also some time for DEP and CZM to respond back, which tends to be a little bit longer than our response. So what we're planning on doing right now is probably by mid-February, we'll be in a position to actually start the Conservation Commission filing, and we'll take it from there. But essentially, we have until August of this year to complete Phase 1. If for some reason we're still in the process of negotiating with DEP or CZM, we can't ask for an extension, but that's our time frame currently. After approvals, permit approvals, we would then go back to MEMA and FEMA, present all the documentation relative to the approvals, and at that point in time, they would then issue the second phase of the contract or the grant. The town would sign that. They'd need money in place at that point in time. And then we'd probably have about 2 years. We have a 3-year process involved here. So we'd have another 2 years because we've used the first year for the design and the permitting, 2 years to do the actual construction. We typically like to do this in the fall or through the winter, but primarily in the fall is the key point when we can do this. Tends to work well. The beach is on in full use at that point in time. You can gain access. Vegetation's still stable. And basically you have a period of time where hopefully you don't have too many storms washing in to disrupt the work.
Are they gonna change the vegetation behind there? Are they gonna try to?
The vegetation up in the upper slope, we may add some additional vegetation. It's a little bit more stable. We do have a vegetation plan right now, but we'll specify species later on.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
The bowling's on the bottom, maybe 7 times, but are they going to be secured or what? The storm was a storm, we've had some pretty good ones. We've had hurricanes that have actually moved stones that big.
Sure.
And if you get, we have one of the hurricanes that we've had, I mean, not only undermining that, but it has actually moved stones that big.
Yeah, the typical problem with the movement of stones, we have a geotextile under ours, we have bedding stone underneath that, and then we have the heavy revetment on top. The reason why a lot of the stones typically move is because the fines and the fine soils underneath the stones are washed out as the water withdraws. So as that soil moves, the rocks shift, and when they rock shift, they lose their locking, which is basically all these stones are going to be locked in place with smaller stones and chinked, basically. So long as the base material doesn't move or shift, then the top material should be intact.
What will the base material be?
The base, well, you have a natural base material, which is the slope. Then you have your geotextile, and then you'd have a gradation of stone. You'd have a crushed stone, a larger stone, a trap rock, a larger stone after that, and then each of the large revetments would be choked into place upon setting. So it's a locked-in stone revetment, and again, so long as the base material, which is your natural slope, doesn't move, and what's stopping it from moving is that geotextile fabric that holds it in place and is anchoring it in place. So water will go through that fabric, but the soil will stay put.
Kind of reminds me of Dorothy Beach along Willow Road, the way they have the revetment. The Army Corps of Engineers did that many years ago, so they're pretty stable.
Right. I mean, you can always have something shift once in a while, but, I mean, you can usually choke it and stabilize it, just like the seawall.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan before he leaves us?
For phase two? Yeah. That's set aside at this point in time because the project was approved. But because of the feedback we got from CZM on some of the aspects of it, they're holding that back until the funding is there. So they do the first phase and finance again, essentially that
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the FY 2018 budget. What we are here tonight to do is to kind of very much review the document as it sits now and then vote to send it to the Finance Committee for their process. In your vote to send it to the Finance Committee, what it identifies is that the Selectmen and myself will continue to work on this budget, and we will send modifications as more information is available and as our process wraps up, but that the FinCom now will have at least a balanced budget they can begin their process with. So tonight, we will vote to send it to the Finance Committee on January 19th. We'll send it to them tomorrow. The Finance Committee then has to finalize the budget by March 27th, and that prepares it for a vote at the town meeting on April 29th. So looking at the budget, we've been working on this since November, and right now we have a balanced budget. It is balanced at a value of $11,686,997. That's about a 1.5% increase over last year. And to just give you a gauge, the previous year's budget was 3% increase over the previous year. So 1.5% increase is a very lean budget, and one that has really taken some remarkable work to get to this point. And when looking at it, the revenues that we've been receiving are a combination of estimated revenues, the free cash, the overlay, and that combination of revenues creates a sum total of $11,732,497. So when you compare that to the $11,686,000, you can see that our revenues for the first time in a long time are actually ahead of our expenditures. What we've seen in past years is that we've been outspending our revenues, and so the 1.5% increase plus the other measures we'll be going through tonight have really done a remarkable job in kind of reversing the trend and trying to get us ahead of ourselves and socking away money for the future and not spending all of the money that we take in. So when you look at the budgets, what traditionally happens is that starting in October, November, the department heads, boards, and committees of the towns start submitting their budgets. And then I start a review process with the departments and the selectmen, and we make cuts associated with the budget message and other policies that we've established. The sum total of those cuts between what was requested by all the boards, committees, and departments is $569,176. That's a significant amount of cuts. The message to the departments and the boards and committees was to level fund or fund only fixed costs or contractual obligations. So what you're looking at is much of the submitted requests were optimal funding, and through just some tough discussions and some refocusing and looking at the bare numbers, we ended up with about a $570,000 cut between request and the actually funded budgets at this time. Now, looking at the budget in its entirety, the revenues continue to grow steadily at approximately 2 to 2.5% annually. Notable increases in the revenues are in permitting and rental income. We have about 33% increase in permits and a rental income increase of about 22%. The state assessments, which means the charges to us, are pretty average. We're about 3% overall. The FY 2018 budget itself increased by a very nominal amount, which has been great. The control factors that we have in place, again, are the budget message, a level fund. And then this year, for the first year, we will be implementing what is called the financial planning practice or exercise. And in the last annual town meeting, we were discussing the same thing, but we were calling it the austerity program. So we thought we would call it something a little more softer. So we've now begun calling it the financial planning exercise. And what this is that we're setting aside additional funds for fixed costs within the budget that are known costs. And over a 5-year period of time, we hope to have a significant amount of funding within the budget itself so that it doesn't keep drawing from our revenues and annual incomes. So first of all, again, I'd like to say that this has been a remarkable effort to get the budget to this point. I'd like to thank the staff, boards and committee members, all who participated in this and who cooperated with the difficult process in getting us here. So overall, we're looking at, again, a history of spending where our expenditures have outpaced our revenues. We have the financial planning exercise for the first year, and the key budget drivers, those elements within the budget that are really kind of either costing us or saving us, are free cash. For this year, it was down a total of $73,000, and that was a combination of, it naturally came down $48,000, but then when you look at the financial planning exercise, that brought it down another $45,500. Our health insurance went up 8%, which is approximately $65,000. Our retirement went up about $63,000, $64,000. Salary increases were approximately $144,000, and education had significant increases in SPED and contractual obligations. So those are really the drivers that we see coming into the budget. And in our capital plan, we set a goal of only spending around $400,000 at the end of the financial planning exercise. So in the current budget, what we see is that we have an appropriation of using free cash of about $36,000, and then the borrowing of about $301,000. So you can see we're about in that $400,000 area. Now, when you look item for item through the budget, again, 1.5%, that's very laudable. The decreases that we saw within the budget are kind of unusual, but they're notable. The insurance costs, property and casualty, actually went down, and the debt, the principal and interest, went down as well. We were, through good management and trying to prevent ourselves from taking on additional debt, we were able to bring that down significantly. Increases that we experienced were in public safety expenses, education, and employee benefits. And then points of concern, kind of looking forward, we're seeing a lot of demand in vehicle maintenance. So adhering to our vehicle replacement policies and rotations and trying to keep vehicle maintenance funding optimal would be recommended as we move forward in these budgets. Now, we've talked a lot about the financial planning exercise, so I just wanted to briefly go over that and try to explain what it truly is. What we have talked about is that we will set aside additional amounts in future budgets to try to get to a sum total of reserves in those areas. And the areas are free cash, capital funding, a paving program, stabilization fund, annual contribution, and other post-employment benefits or retirement contributions. The sum total of all those contributions is about $925,000, which is our goal, and it's over a 5-year period. So we would contribute from each year about $185,000. So that's carved out of the budget in addition to all the expenses that we're seeing from each year. So you can see that really increases the challenge that we have going forward. So you'll see in the financial plan exercise summary that free cash, we were able to set aside $45,500, and that'll be left as unencumbered funding and will roll into the general fund. We have capital funding that, through the debt schedule, we're able to carve away capacity so that we have that for future use, and at the end of the 5-year period, we should have about $400,000 worth of capacity built into the system. Paving program, we have moved $20,000 into the water and sewer for the first year, and then in future years, we will work to use available funding like free cash to buy down that amount. Stabilization fund, we are contributing $6,500 this year, and the same for the other post-employment benefit contributions. We'll be contributing $3,300. So the sum total of contributions to the financial planning exercise is about $75,300 plus the capital debt capacity. So sum total, we have about $120,300 that of value that have been set aside in addition to all of the expenditures that we've seen. The goal of this program is that at the end of the 5-year period, we have greater stability, we have greater discretion over our funding, and that we are well ahead of the curve and not spending at the rate we're spending right now. So that is a kind of an overview of our budget going forward. There's still lots of work that has to be done. The Finance Committee will begin their work next week, and I will be meeting with them to walk through the process. Tonight you have before you the budget, the capital plan, and the financial planning exercise summary. So what I would like to do is seek a vote of the Selectmen to send this to the Finance Committee for their process, understanding that we will continue to work on it at this level as well. Any questions on the budget? I know it's a lot to take in.
I'll entertain a motion that we send.
Well, could we,
Well, let's make the motion and then second and discuss it.
all right. I move the Board of Selectmen vote to send the Finance Committee the FY 2018 balanced budget in order that the 2018 budget development process can be started. The budget, however, continues under review by the Board of Selectmen and the Town Administrator, and any resulting changes will be forwarded to the Finance Committee for consideration.
Okay, I'll second that for discussion. Discussion.
Well, under the circumstances, I'd like to move this to the February 2nd meeting. But if you wish, I mean, we can talk this over, as long as we have additions, when the full board is here, we can really talk about sending additions forward. Either way is fine by me, but I'd like to see the full board look at this before we send it forward.
I would like to see Richie here too. It's only fair to him, and he's been a selectman for so long that, you know, he understands budget process. There are some changes I would like to see in the budget that I've looked over. I don't have a problem sending it to the FinCom for them to look at.
Certainly, and that's what your vote would do.
I certainly don't want to, I don't want to accept the budget.
No,
That's what I'm saying.
no. And that's why the vote was worded as it is, because what you're doing is you're saying that, all right, this is a balanced budget, start working on it, and we will continue and come back to you with more changes.
I don't have a problem sending it to the finance.
Part of my reason is that I sat through a 3-hour budget meeting downstairs, sore hip and all. I just had my hip done. And it should have only lasted an hour and a half. A lot of people had a lot of things to say, so I'd like to see the full board. But if we can send this forward knowing that there are more revisions, then fine by me.
Okay, and I do want to attend, and I usually do attend the Finance Committee meetings. And it's kind of fun when they
And they get started right off.
They do.
What
They're
you're
actually
saying.
scheduled for next week, and we have the budget binders ready to be loaded and sent to them for their start.
So we really can't send them an empty binder, can we?
No, and
So I would say
time
send
is
that
of the
to 'em.
essence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I just, knowing that with the full board here, we can spend, I hope not a lot, but at least some time talking through, because it seemed that, you know, that the full board had a lot of questions.
The one thing that I'd asked of the chairman, and so when we're together, we should speak of that, is I'd like to actually hold a couple meetings, just us, to kind of sit down and cull through it all, and then have that back and forth so that I can get some more feedback from you. So I think that's what I would advocate. I'll talk to each of you separately in preparation for the meeting we have next week, and at that time, maybe we can talk about scheduling a meeting of sitting down and looking at this. But in the interim, for the sake of the Finance Committee, I think it's good to get this ball rolling.
Yeah, I'd like to see them, they're gonna meet next week anyway, so I'd like to see them get something, you know. But I do want Richie here for, to
Well, he
speak on,
had
to
some
speak on it
changes.
also.
He had some changes, so.
Yeah, and I think I have some, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure the FinCom will too. So, okay, all those in favor of sending it to the
Aye.
FinCom? Okay, aye.
Great, thank you.
Motion carries.
The next item has to do with the warrant. Tonight, we'll be looking for a vote to close the warrant as of January 30th. We don't meet again till February 2nd, so you have to take the vote tonight. What you have is a combination of documents. The first document is really a listing of the routine articles and the potential new articles. At the February 2nd meeting, what I'd like to do is talk to you about the potential new articles. And then you also have a second document in your packet, which is a draft warrant. And in that draft warrant, we just started loading the standard shell of the warrant as we see it. Many of the articles repeat themselves year after year, so we keep them in their form, and we just start loading with the new information. So what you're seeing here is mostly just those articles. But I've highlighted those areas where we actually have some change. So you'll see some yellow highlighted areas that are within this new warrant. And we'll have to look at a combination of these as well as that potential list, because they do vary. The potential list have items on there that we hear about or we've discussed in previous meetings, and they're just items we need to bring forward to see if they're ready to go forward. So looking at the highlighted items, the assessing office would like to bring forward a senior tax work-off program. We have modifications to a couple revolving funds. We have a school capital item. We have a couple of other capital items, but the school capital item is actually a new one. We have a stabilization fund article, which would allow for the funding that we just talked about in the planning exercise to be placed into the stabilization fund. We also have a similar other post-employment benefit article that would do the same to allow the money to be set in there. But then also you have a other post-employment benefit article that relates to the new Modernization Act changes that have recently come up, that we have a trust fund and we need to modify it so that it's in compliance with the trust fund. Article 26, you'll see, is for Community Preservation Committee actions, and we are waiting for their process. Their deadline for submittal is tomorrow, and so they will start their process immediately. We typically don't see those articles until a month down the line. What you'll see in the capital plan is that we've listed a number of capital funded issues that will be funded by CPC. We'll be going through that process and we'll report back as that information is available. And then we also have one petition that has started surfacing. It hasn't been submitted yet, but that's listed right here under Article 28. And that is what we're seeing right now for the warrant. If tonight I'd just like a vote to close the warrant on the 30th, and then we'll come back on the 2nd, and we'll pick up this discussion at that point.
Okay, so you want to close the warrant on the 30th?
On the
last
30th,
day.
yeah.
Okay.
So there are two
Because
closings.
typically, that's the way it should be done.
Yeah. There are two closings. The first closing is earlier for the internal staff, et cetera,
Right.
and then the public is for the 30th.
Right. Has there been any citizens petitions come in yet?
We've just heard of one, possibly two, that they haven't come in though yet. So they'll usually wait until the last week.
Okay, I'd like to hear about them. All right. So, as long as it's the 30th, as long as it's the last day of January, I don't have a problem. So I'll entertain a motion that we close the
I move the Board of Selectmen vote to close the April 29, 2017 annual town meeting warrant as follows. January 20th, 2017, closed for submittal of articles by town boards, committees, and staff, and January 30th, 2017, closed for submittal of articles by the general public.
I'll second it for discussion. Discussion?
Yeah, this does not mean us. We
No,
can
no.
open.
Yes.
We can
The
open an ad
the Board of
at any
Selectmen
time.
can go right up to the very end.
Right.
And
And we
so-
would, I think, for a citizen, if they wanted an article in the warrant, if it's late.
If you close it on the 30th, which you're required to, they would have to submit a petition, but a petition is only 10
Signatures.
signatures.
They have to submit a petition anyway, I mean,
True.
so,
True.
And the 20th is for internal, but the board can, that's a means of just giving us a little more running time, but the board can entertain any article at any point up till the point where you close the warrant for printing.
And in discussion, this Article 12, Senior Tax Work-Off Program,
Yep.
all the work we're doing as selectmen and with seniors, we should probably pay no taxes, Enzo.
so it went up. It went up to, the tax amount from $1,500 to, from $1,000, which means that
Yeah.
the state's gonna kick in another $500, so that's good. I mean, you know, for the seniors that wanna get down in any department, I think, isn't it?
Right.
Pretty much?
Well, yeah, what they can do is they can do the work-off for any of our town departments.
Right.
And we use quite a few seniors for that purpose.
Yeah.
And they work very well.
Okay, so, all those in favor of closing the warrant on the 30th?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries.
Great, thank you. Next item is a snow and ice authorization to exceed the budget request. We haven't had a lot of snow as of yet, but as you know, sometimes it isn't the quantity of snow, it's the amount of freezing rain or precipitation. So unfortunately, when we have freezing rain or icy conditions, we have to put out product, we have to expend labor, we have to use our equipment. So at this point, we have an overrun, well, let me step back. Each year, we fund $20,000 in the Snow and Ice Fund, and each year, we've gone over. So this is a traditional expectation. And the state allows us to exceed the budget and then fund the amount at a later time. So at this point, we've exceeded the $20,000 budget that's in there by approximately $30,000. So what we would seek is a $50,000 allotment to go, our authorization to go over the amount, so that would give us $70,000. And right now, we have an expenditures of just under $50,000.
I move the Board of Selectmen vote to authorize the town administrator to exceed the snow and ice budget by an additional $50,000, increasing the overall authorization to a total of $70,000.
I'll second that for discussion, and is there any discussion?
No.
I just have one question. Typically, every year it's $20,000. But doesn't some of that come from water and sewer, the enterprise fund? Didn't they?
It doesn't, although we have in the past charged equipment costs,
Right,
but not snow and ice itself.
okay, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Great, and that's all I have for the town administrator report.
Okay. I do want to talk about,
I'm sorry,
oh,
yes.
first of all, the wharf wall. You said that it started today. Now, are they they're taking some of those, there was a few questions that were asked to me. They're taking some of those big cobblestones out, the big granite stones. They are going to be put back in, right?
Yeah, what they're doing today is, there are various aspects of the project that are happening. The footing of that entire wall
Yeah.
is breaking apart. So what they're doing is they're trying to get the sloughing parts of it removed.
Okay.
And I think what they're having to do is take out some of the stones to get at the sloughing material. And then they're going to replace or fix the footing.
Okay.
But they're supposed to keep the wall intact, and then they're going to come back and grout it.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
There was some concern that, you know, they were going to take those granite stones, they're huge, out of there. I think they're probably curb stones.
Yeah.
And replace them with something that we didn't, wouldn't look so nice. And that's, it's kind of a nice wall, so
Exactly.
hopefully they'll keep it that way. And one other thing, trash. I'd like to see them get a monitor out. There's so many people that I get calls all the time, and the people do call the police, and they go through the routine, but the DPW has to go out and pick up a lot of trash because they're just skipping houses. And these people I know are putting their trash out before 7. They'll just go right by it. So I would ask that they provide us with a monitor for a couple of weeks just to make sure that these guys are picking up the trash. Would you agree? Okay.
DPW picked mine up 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, there's no need of that. They have other things to do, and it's fine if they do it. They don't mind.
Nice of them to do it.
But these guys are supposed to be picking up the trash, and then you can't get a hold of them.
Yeah.
So,
There's a
and I remind everybody that if they don't, call the police station, and the police station's, the way it goes, the police will call the DPW, and they'll take care of it, because you can't get a hold of the DPW or the town hall on a Friday afternoon.
Correct. And then there's a call out. Yeah, there's a clause in the contract for collections that allows us to call for this runner. So yes, we'll talk with them. And then ocean rescue?
Okay, the ocean rescue. I'm going to make a motion that we suspend the ocean rescue for the winter months. I would entertain that motion. T, could
Second discussion.
Okay. My reasoning behind it is, I don't think there's not enough training right now for these guys. And I do want to see better training. We're going to have, I mean, we're in the middle of the Atlantic. And in the wintertime, these guys have to go out, for them to go out in that water with a Zodiac and possibly get hurt or killed is to me, is not a good idea without really, really good training. And this goes for the regular guys. They're the ones that are going to go out because they're the ones that are there during the day. I think we need better equipment, and I think we need training with certifications. They need to be certified, because if something does happen, someone's going to ask for certifications. Well, where's your certification for this and that? So I think we should move to just suspend it for the winter months. And I know that if they do get a call and it's close by, they're going to respond anyway. I know the firemen, and they'll respond, and if they can get to the person, I'm sure they will. But to send them out in a Zodiac or in harm's way would not be my pick, so.
If I could recommend, we're meeting with the Fire Architectural Assessment next week, and the chief will be there, and several of the firefighters. We may, if you don't mind talking about it then, because there are requirements that for us to respond, and I think if we can define what the training limitations are, I think that would be more helpful. Because I know that Mike the fire chief, he has to work to meet our obligations and prevent us from becoming liable in any situation. So I guess that would be a better conversation to have with Mike and his men to see if we limit what you consider to be the risky training elements.
Well, that's my point. I mean, I don't want to send, if they're not certified and they go out in the middle of the ocean, after somebody, then we'll be liable. I mean, I would say that, and this is new. I mean, just came upon us this year that, he was going to extend the ocean rescue into the winter months. Now, I can tell you that that's fine. If they get a call from there's a kite surfer on Doggy Beach that's in trouble and he's close to shore, they're certainly going to try to help him. But there's no launch point there for a Zodiac, and to come around from the wharf, they'll flip it over. I mean, they don't have the equipment, and I just can't see, without the proper training, the money and the involvement from the whole staff down there, I just think it's a mistake. So I would move that we just suspend it for the winter months this year. We get them trained, we find some money to get them trained and the proper equipment.
again, we had this conversation with the fire chief of a previous meeting, and at that time, he talked about his understanding your concerns, and that he would take those into consideration as he moves forward with his policies. And I need each department head to be able to meet their obligations, protect the town in the manner that they're required to. And I think that, again, by just expressing these concerns, Mike can come back to us and talk to us about what limitations he can place on anything that occurs. But I know he wants his guys to, the firemen, to be ready for response to limited levels in any situation. So I guess the question is, what aspects of training you find problematic?
Well, I think that we should leave it the way it always was, and that is it's suspended at a certain time. And I know that if they get a call and there's somebody drowning in the middle of the winter, or something, they're having a problem out there, I know they're going to go out there and they're going to try. They're going to call the Coast Guard. I would hate to see them go out there and get in trouble, and the nearest company that's going to come is Marblehead, and they're a half an hour away, half hour, 45 minutes. And you can't last in the water that long, not in the wintertime, not around here, you can't. So, and I understand what you expect and what we expect, but I would suspend it I would just go back to the way it was a year ago, and we work on this.
And I think the chief can work with you with that, in that direction. So I'm not saying that we're not kind of agreeing. I'm just saying that in the agreement, there's a subtlety that I think works best for the town, because what I want to avoid is being in a situation where we inadvertently create a liability. That's all.
Okay, well, again, I think we will incur a liability if something happens to one of those guys. So I would move that. T, would you?
Call the vote.
Do I have a second?
I already seconded it.
Oh, okay. Okay, so all those in favor of suspending for the winter?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay, the motion carries. Okay.
We have one announcement.
Old business.
Old business. Any old business?
On the Nahant Open Space Master Plan, NOSMP. There's been a lot of talk. There was a great meeting. I thought it was a great meeting. Everyone voiced their opinions, especially the Fox Hill Road lower end towards the pharmacy, many of whom I grew up with. And they're right on. So I went up to talk to the town administrator, but at the last meeting I asked for from our town council as far as what we can do. Are we tied into the Nahant Open Space Master Plan if we start with dredging, which now has become more than dredging, it's become taking care of the people down at that end of the Fox Hill Road too. And the town administrator is confident. He's talked with the Public Works Director. Director? Do I have it?
Director, yes.
Thank you. And just that we're on top of it, we're working towards it. And I asked for an opinion from the town council what our liability is towards the Nahant Open Space Master Plan. And he said the Board of Selectmen will not need to approve the overall plan if they elect to move forward by dredging down by Fox Hill Road. In fact, I'm paraphrasing here, in fact, the town charter expressly provides the Board of Selectmen with, quote, the general direction and management of all town property, unquote. So we are covered. I want the Fox Hill Road people to know that all of us are on top of this. And it's as important to us as the revetment, because these people get flooded constantly. So, thank you.
That's good, T. Thank you. Talking about the Fox Hill Road, at the bottom of Fox Hill Road, there's a real issue with flooding, like T said. The catch basins go nowhere. So the dredging, what's the dredging going to cost, you figure?
we're working with mosquito control to see if they can do the project for us and then use our funds to, get us further down the process. They're analyzing it at this point. We only spoke with them right after the Open Space Recreation Master Plan presentation. So we anticipate within 2-3 weeks we should know, and the timeline if they can do it. If they can't do it, then what we'll do is we'll seek bids to try to determine if, through a combination of DPW work and contractor assistance, we can spend the money to the furthest extent possible.
Okay, because it's $20,000, so I don't think we're gonna spend it all on dredging the ditches. I would appropriate that money, the rest of the money, to go to fixing the catch basins down there that don't drain right. We gotta do something in that area. There was talk at the meeting about Doggy Beach, that the line went up to Doggy Beach. And unfortunately, that pipe is under someone's garage and it's collapsed.
Really?
So we can't use it. So it would have to go through the ditch. And I know there's some easements between Fox Hill and Ward Road, is it? Would it be Ward Road?
Yes.
Into that ditch. And that would drain the other way, which it should anyway, which it always has. So we should try to get that pipe, all those catch basins tied in as soon as possible for those people so that they drain the proper way. I wouldn't want it on Doggy Beach anyway. I don't think it's the right thing to do because you'd be digging up the dune, number one. And number two, you'd have to put a clapper valve there. And they don't always work right. I think the best way to go would be the ditch.
Well,
That runs along Ward Road.
my opinion is that very old people like our fathers figured out a way to make it go to Doggy Beach. And I think Doggy Beach is in fact the answer. But I'm not an engineer. But I really, really, really don't want to see us putting above-ground ponds and fields, et cetera, when the infrastructure needs work first.
Yeah, we need to fix that first.
And we all are on the same boat on this. It's just, it has to be fixed.
So I'd like to see some of that money go towards that. It's a grant, it's drainage, and I think we could probably do it,
Yeah, I think what we'd have to do is just navigate through what aspects of it we could fund, and then with our own town funds, the combination will get us there. But I was very pleased to hear that somehow there was historically an outlet that went towards Doggy Beach, because that makes more sense than sending it all the way across to Willow Road.
Right. The only problem is I actually talked to a former administrator today, and I talked to him about it, and he informed me that the house, there's actually a garage on top of it. There's no easement there anymore, so I think it would be tough to do that. But, let's do some elevations and see if the water would run that way, towards the other way better,
Exactly. Now, I've been speaking with the DPW director, and he's looking into doing camera work to see where the obstructions exist, and if we can get a length of pipe that we can actually salvage, and then take it from there, or if we just have to start from scratch and redo it all. So we'll get an assessment, and we'll just go from there, and then we'll talk about how the grant restrictions will, either help us or inhibit us.
Right. And I don't think, personally, as a matter of fact, I know that we're not going to get permission to put a pipe on this gentleman's property.
Okay.
Again, so I would have to say we're going to have to do something different.
I think we have options.
Endo, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
Where would you do the dredging if you can't get across the Doggy Beach?
Well, the whole dredging...
The water table is almost equal to Fox Hill Road.
Right. The whole dredging process is going to start from Ward Road, and it's going to go all the way through the golf course into Bear Pond. Bear Pond is actually filled with muck, too.
Go under the
Bear Pond, when I was a kid,
Bear
and I know
Pond.
when T was a kid, and you, Bear Pond was it was deep.
Right.
It's no longer deep anymore. It's all filled up with muck, and so that has to be cleaned out. The ditches have to be cleaned out.
Oh, is there a connection between Bear Pond and the little channel there that runs across the golf course?
Oh, yeah, Oh, yeah. It starts at Ward Road and it goes all the way to right to Bear Pond. Everything drains into that golf course. And everything on the other side where Ben lives there, it drains from 40 steps down
Right.
into that ditch and it goes out the clapper valve on
Goes on Joe Beach.
Joe's Beach, right. So it's important that we look at both ways. I think dredging the ditches and keeping it flowing is the way to go.
Because that water table there, like I say, it's equal to Fox Hill Road itself.
Right.
When you get an extra high tide and you get a storm, it's not going anywhere.
We would run into a real problem with the DEP if we started digging holes in the dune,
Yeah.
trust me. You can't, 100 years ago you could do that, you could do anything you want, but now you can't, so that's gonna be an issue.
I still think we can do it. I still
Meet
think
at
we
Doggy
can.
Beach?
Yep, I do.
If the pipe's there, I don't know.
And as one of the parents said that night, if you stand down,
Going right across
You
with a
stand-
path to go over there, where they go from the end of Ward Road.
Yeah, that's what I was,
It's away from the house. You go right from the end of Ward Road, right across where that path is, where they walk over to do their,
That's the dune, though.
yeah, but what about going under it?
that actually sounds like a great idea.
It is a good idea, but you'd have to really,
You could
Again,
restore
the
the
D-
dune after you did that.
you'd have to, that would be a discussion for the DEP and would be very expensive, because you're talking about restoring a dune, a coastal dune.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing up there right now, so it's very expensive.
I wonder if we could get a subsequent grant for that and turn it into kind of a mini short beach project right there.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah. But
It's worth looking at, so.
Great idea. Yeah.
but as one woman said, as I was saying, standing here, when you stand down there, you're actually below sea level.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
right, exactly.
something has to give. And I'm not worried about DEP, Enzo. We're gonna
Okay.
go right into Doggy Beach.
Okay.
Right through the path.
Well, we have a stormwater management plan, we have all that in place, it's, so these are all things that we gotta look at, and,
Yep.
House has been built on the garage.
yeah. Well, that's what happened, yeah.
From the 1900s.
So would there be any way to restore that flow of water, right? I know we sort of talked a little bit about some of the pipes, putting a pipe out to Doggy Beach. Is there anything we can do to help restore that flow?
Naturally, you mean?
Or maybe it would be, yeah, what naturally, or what man-made infrastructure would be sort of work with the natural coastal things rather than just try to, do a dredging or something like temporary, because we're not going to be dredging.
Well, we dredge almost every year. The dishes get cleaned out almost every year. They have to.
Are there things we could do to, like a one-time cost, where we could build certain infrastructure that would allow sediment to flow so that we wouldn't have to redredge, or we don't have to redredge once a decade versus once a year, that kind of thing?
If you look at the other end, the Willow Road side, we have a pumping station. And it basically takes and pumps the water out of Bear Pond and puts it over the wall, and then there's the clapper valve there. So we could replicate that on this end as well. And by pulling it from both sides, you can actually, you move the sedimentation and drain the water. It would be under circumstances that were severe. We wouldn't do it all the time, but if we had, significant storms, it'd be a great way to just empty it all out. That's one way.
It drains pretty good now. I mean, I can always remember before 78 and before 78, storm of 78, the water never drained. But we put those pumps in Bear Pond, and we pump that water right over that seawall. And every time we know we're going to have a storm. I mean, you know 3 or 4 days ahead of time now, or even a week ahead of time. So typically what we do is we pump it down. We pump that whole pond down, and that just drains everything. So, and the clapper valve is really not the answer. It's not a good system because it plugs up and it doesn't always work right. So those pumps really help. You just keep pumping water over and getting rid of it so that everything will drain in there. And since '91, I don't think I've seen a storm where we've really gotten inundated with water for any length of time. Maybe a day or so, Roz, would you say? But that's about it. So, I mean, the system works pretty good. And when we drain Bear Pond, that water just all runs down there. It all just, you can see it. You can go on Spring Road, you can see it flowing through the ditch on the golf course, so. That's it. Okay, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn and go into executive session.
I move the Board of Selectmen move to executive session for real estate and personnel negotiations and not to return to public session.
Okay, I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Okay, one more, just one reminder, the Coast Guard housing surveys are due back February 3rd, 2017. Try not to be late with it. Okay, so we're adjourned.
But you can talk.
You can talk, yeah.